Okay. Thank you for everyone for having me today. This is a very big event. And thank you to SDS for having me. There's three things today I will talk about. John from Hang Lung is already talking about a number of elements about sustainability and how it applies to the retail space. So there's three particular things that I will talk about today. One is around climate resilience and how it plays a role. Another one I certainly will talk about is the concept of sustainable leases and win-win scenarios between landlords and tenants. And the third one I will talk about is often the social side of sustainability, which is certainly ties into investing in our culture, activation of places, and how we benefit the broader community and society. A little bit about myself. I'm an environmental scientist. I've been working in real estate for some 30 years. In the sustainability space, working on various projects in UK, US, Australia, Asia, and now I'm currently based in Hong Kong. So creating shared value through future fit, placemaking and partnerships. A little bit about New World, and I won't spend too long. New World is an integrated real estate, development, investment management and property company. So we look at investment management. In other words, we own assets for long-term periods, being both commercial, community infrastructure, retail, office, school, education, and so forth, as well as asset management. So we not only run assets for ourselves, but other organisations. You'd be familiar with the K11 brand, which is part of the New World business here in Shanghai. Obviously, who do we care about and, the fundamentals of sustainability are, our customers, our tenants, our investors, our banks, our sustainable finance partners and our JV partners, our people, our communities and the broader society and what kind of legacy we're leaving as an organisation. All right, and fundamentally, when I say future fit places, it's about the places that we create need to not only thrive now, but need to be adaptable and diverse and be future fit so that they can meet the changing needs of not only society, but also our climate and the environment that we live in. Okay? Organisational resilience is how we integrate sustainable thinking into our operations, whether it be the diversity of our board and our operations, whether it be about how we provide governance and transparency in operating organisations. And finally, enriching lives is certainly about not only our employees and how we invest in them, attract and retain talent, diversity, equity, inclusion at the board level, to safety performance of the organisation, right the way through to how do we positively contribute to the society we operate and how do we measure that? Not measure just the inputs, but certainly the outputs. So I'll talk about the first of the three things that I think are really important. It's about resilient placemaking for the long term. These are all New World developments in the photos. So firstly, this gives you an indication of the variability of climate change over the years, and you've seen various ways of doing it, but I think what's really most important is that the pace at which climate is changing and how it is impacting our daily lives. So even if we thought 10 years ago the level of discussion around it, but I think even if you get beyond the corporate language around climate resilience and you think about how it is translating into our daily lives, you are starting to see that it is impacting, where you are reading aspects of how it is disrupting not only community life, business life, but maybe even your personal life, whether it be how you get to and from work, whether it may be how you get your groceries, how you insure your car, where you live, these kinds of aspects. Another thing to think about is that we're all familiar with is extreme weather events can cause material disruptions to not only the valuation of your assets, including retail spaces, but also the operations of those assets. In other words, our tenants, whether they be commercial, retail tenants in those. So this graph over here in US $1 billion, I think, and this is from one of the global reinsurers called Swiss Re, highlights that of the 10-year losses of natural catastrophes, the light green represents the losses that were covered by insurance, okay? The dark green indicates the losses that investors, property owners, mums and dads, businesses suffer because they're not covered for that via insurance. It might be that they're not aware, they mightn't even have an insurance policy, they mightn't have even included that in the policy, they mightn't have thought of it. But this is a way where you start seeing the bare basics around sustainability fundamentally does need to integrate in how you look at real estate and how it operates and how that plays into real estate assets and how you operate these. Another thing to consider in insurance, okay, it is not just about physical damage to your asset. If we have a number of tenants in one of our shopping malls that can't actually access the mall, or the mall isn't operating for 3, 4, 5 days because either A, critical infrastructure's gone down on the mall, people can't access that location of work or retail, so therefore the businesses can't trade, then as a landlord we also need to consider those risks to us as a landlord if we're providing a venue that is of higher risk or higher business disruption to climate. You can see some of the headlines up there. China suffers $59 billion in economic losses. 86% of climate disaster losses in APAC are uninsured. That's Aon, another big insurer. Okay, and these just aren't specific to mainland. They're in Hong Kong, they're in Singapore, they're in other parts of Asia, they're in Australia as well as UK. But it's about being aware of these and how, as someone who's in real estate, understands how these interact. So how do you, as a practitioner, and I know we've got consultants in the room, designers, we might have lawyers or people in finance or even in executive positions, how do you actually translate this macro challenge into a more granular level? So at new bids and acquisitions, organisations need to put a degree of filters in how you actually assess that risk through preliminary screening tools and other devices, how you price in this risk over time and how you consider that up front if you're looking at making acquisitions of large investments, or you're going in a bid, or you're actually preparing your budget for a particular major development. And you price climate risk not only in terms of the physical risks, whether they be insurance, but you also price it in terms of what will the cost of energy be, if a carbon price flows through to the materials you use, how will that affect, and also who your tenants are going to be. In development and planning, you then incorporate climate into design, the physical design features, covered walkways, integrated developments to local transport, your height levels. Do you put critical infrastructure in basements? No, you don't. You want to bring those up so that if your basement is designed to flood, that critical infrastructure allows the asset to keep operating. You design basements so that if the basement does flood, it's easy to bring and have alert systems connected to AI that you can evacuate car parks. The basement floods, 3 days later the water goes down, then you clean the car park and then you have the safe ingress back of people and materials. But these are all operational considerations. And you also can't assume that your facilities managers understand that. So there's a degree of training and engagement around how you do operate an asset that might have will increase prevalence of either extreme heat days, extreme wind, intense rainfall, fluvial flood from local drainage systems, or flooding from sea level rise and nearby waterways. Okay? And that's what I talked there about operations and maintenance. Another key thing for operations and maintenance is that when you're planning the OPEX, operational expenditure, and capital expenditure of your asset enhancements over their life, you start considering some of these elements about whether you design in future expansion or improvement of those systems over time. So a good example with New World, to bring it back down to grassroots, we've assessed over 200 of our assets in mainland Asia and Hong Kong around preliminary climate risk screening using detailed GIS mapping linked to kinds of products similar with insurance companies and so forth. And of those, as an example, here might be 3 of our particular assets. This is how we start at a high level screening of potential exposure before, and that gives us, out of 200, it gives us a higher priority, a medium and a lower. Then with those higher priority assets, we then do a more detailed assessment individual to look at elements of what is the current measures that has in place with regards to operational procedures, building management systems and alert. actual design elements of the building, where it's located, local stormwater and so forth, as well as size and capacity of heating, cooling systems, natural light. So once we do this, this helps us actually then prioritise the value at risk, which is an insurance language, and tying that with your operational decision making and your investment decision making around, do you hold the asset, do you sell the asset, do you enhance the asset, and how might you prioritise or consider some of these elements as you're prioritising asset enhancements. This is a bit of a case study of one of our developments in Hong Kong, Victoria Dockside. You know, climate it can present itself in a number of ways. This is a waterfront property, but a couple of key elements in there, or we'll talk about later on, is certainly around placemaking. But the levels we've designed that place up to, because it is on an active harbour, does allow for that operation to continually operate, and has actually allowed for material climate and sea level rise in the design, so that asset is of low risk to flooding exposure. And we work with our insurers so that they can also understand the elements. Obviously, it's a large mixed-use development with the Rosewood Hotel, with K11 Museum, which is retail. There is serviced offices, K11 artists, and serviced apartments. Okay, so this gives an idea of how not only you look at the green building ratings, but you start bringing climate resilience more into the design. So this is located on top of a major urban transit, so people can get to and from the development entirely undercover. And how we've designed the HVAC systems, or heating, ventilation, cooling systems, is so that these can operate at a peak level in extreme temperature days, even going out 20 and 30 years. Okay. Another development of ours, K11 Ecoast. This is an example of a large public domain area, obviously high proximity to waterfront, large area of exposure to natural climate, and how we design these public domain spaces to bring in sponge city concepts. So we're not managing large volumes of surface water. These intentionally go into the landscape design. How we design the waterfronts with regards to sea level rise, climate risk and water management, but also how you operate the sustainability of the buildings in those particular areas, so that you are actually planning how these operate. And just one more example. You know, and I think something that's really important to note is we talked there about sponge city concept. This has been something that's been inherent in design, particularly in mainland, for a very long time. But what it fundamentally achieves are all the core elements of good climate resilience in design. You know, I think we probably see the two as mutually exclusive, but actually a thorough embracement of sponge city design and water-sensitive urban design has a huge positive impact to the resilience of a particular precinct or a singular asset in city design. And just another one, Ningbo New World Plaza. This is another development, obviously in New World that is currently underway. So this obviously looks at not only efficiency, but how we provide accessibility and large open spaces. Because, you know, one thing certainly that we've learned over the past few years is, as humans, we do need public domain and we do need spaces to interact. And these public domain spaces obviously not only can positively impact the local heat climate in that particular area of the city, because you do have green spaces that have far less heat retentive and far lower reflective ability, but also it provides an area where people can connect and actually designing cities better so that there is a balance between these two, because there are mental health benefits of people accessing nature and public domain spaces. I'll talk a little bit about the second one, and I know John from Hang Lung, you know, we deal with some of the same tenants and we have the same challenges as landlords, but the real parameter here is, you know, as a landlord, there is an element of sustainability we can control as a landlord, but at the end of the day, we can't control how much energy a tenant uses in their tenancy. We can't control how much waste, if they're efficient at recycling, if they're really adopting a circular economy. And we don't have a direct influence on, how they do their fit outs and how they run their business. These are tenants. But what we've seen over the last 10 years, but certainly over the last 5 years more recently, is that those corporate commitments of large retail and large multinational corporate tenants, whether they be banks, financial institutions, clothing, retail, jewellery, sportswear and so forth, they're making these corporate commitments, and these are starting to trickle down into the tenancies that they want to operate. So where they choose for a new tenancy, they're not just looking at the best location, the best rent. They are all considering, well, how does this tenancy actually align to the corporate sustainability commitments their head offices may have made, whether those head offices are based in Paris or London or US or here in Asia. So we're trying to get a win-win here, and this has been a fundamental challenge, and I've dealt with landlord-tenant type of initiatives particularly in UK and Australia, and as well as Singapore and Malaysia. But if you bring it back down to the fundamentals, you're creating the right place to start. So one, as I mentioned, tenants have commitments around natural resources, circular economy, and community engagement. So a good example is we recently surveyed top 60 of our retail tenants across K11, and 83% of those tenants have publicly stated positions around decarbonising their operation, driving circular economy, and certainly wanting to improve the health and well-being of not only their employees, but potentially elements of the community where they have a presence. Okay, so those are all shared values that we have as well as an organisation, as I highlighted earlier on. So where do we want to get to? As I mentioned, 80% of tenants have, 80% of tenants have energy, water, waste reduction commitments. 82% of those tenants we surveyed want access to not only their data, but are actually starting to get interested in not only how they're performing, but maybe how does their, let's say, retail fashion outlet perform with regards to energy performance per square metre, waste per square metre, or air quality? How might that perform compared to other similar types of sectors in our other malls or either in that mall? So they start getting an idea of benchmarking, not customer A and customer B, but this is just sort of giving me an idea of, here's your average consumption per square metre, and here might be some other tenants in the retail. But it just starts giving them information that they need. So they get live automated information. They want to understand the benchmarking. And as well as that, a lot of fit outs, as John was mentioning earlier on, these are often set at a group level and heavily controlled, maybe at a head office overseas. But a lot of the procurement is still done locally. So how do we engage those particular tenants with fit out decisions to make sure these fit outs can either achieve a desired green rating and or improve the performance of the asset? Because how you fit out a tenancy has a long impact on the actual operational performance of that asset and whether or not that particular tenancy meets their own corporate sustainability objectives. So you always hear about green leases. I would say that the majority of green leases are well intended and have been for a number of years, but the level of traction and success of those has been probably debatable. But key elements of a green lease are you need to have clear agreements in what are the key components of a green lease, how it affects their operation, are there penalties, are there rewards or incentives for their performance. But that needs to be granular and it needs to be clear so that not only their legal team can understand, but their operational team can understand. Secondly, in green leases, it's critical you offer guidelines, tools, and clear standards, and these can't be too technical. It's no good us giving a tenant a 150-page guide to how to do a sustainable fit-out, because often they will give that guide to their subcontractors. Okay, these things need to be clear, easily digestible, and keeping things at a high enough level so that they can prioritise key actions. Smart solutions and data. We need to move past paper in this space. We need to get tenant performance and landlord performance. We already do as an organisation. All our performance is digitally tracked and monitored and benchmarked across the organisation. Where we want to move with tenants is to start doing that same process for them. because tenant emissions are a landlord's scope 3 emissions, okay? And finally, in the engagement, it's no good giving people technology solutions, green leases and that, if the person signing the green lease is not the actual party that will be operating the branch or making local decisions. So as a landlord, we can't assume that if we've engaged one part of an organisation, that that's going to translate through to others. So I think a couple of things to think about, and if you're a design consultant or you're a retail tenant or you're a landlord, I think there is definitely a win-win in the place of the right sustainable leases, and I think right where we are now, you are starting to see a bit of an evolution of what they look like, from well-intentioned best endeavours to, okay, don't tell me, show me what you want to do, show me how it's going to perform, and maybe even show me how that's going to help me being a tenant in my own commitments. And so it's about that transparency and I guess that level of more sophisticated understanding and looking at those tenants that have these commitments and using those tenants as the kind of Trojan horses to get the momentum right in green leases, and the level of engagement you need to then build the traction to then bring that out to other tenants that might still not have either the design capacity, the understanding, or the level of sustainability awareness in their business, okay? So it's not just about showcasing the best, but it's about bringing up the baseline of industry so that they can perform the same. Okay, finally, and I'm conscious of time, in sustainability, I think a lot of people look at the E, S and G, and the G is around governance and your licence to practice and how you run the organisation. And the S, I think we're all hearing a lot about with regards to climate risk, resilience, resource efficiency, biodiversity, and these other very important parameters. And I think that but on this note, the S under social impact, I think that there is a huge opportunity to shift our thinking around social impact from, I think our fundamental drivers are still there, that we want to do good as a society and that we want to help benefit not only the few intended people, but actually benefit a broader cross-section of society. So where we want to get to as an organisation at New World is not only to continue to invest heavily in what we're doing around social impact and what we're doing around cultural commerce that I'll talk to in the K11 operations in our broader business, and around art and identity and heritage, but also where we want to start to get to is start quantifying the outcomes. So we are looking at impact investing models, we are looking at social return on investment, so that once you move past the photos and the feel good, how do we really measure the actual positive impact you're trying to make to society and a community? And how do you maybe prioritise your efforts and your investments and your activities to be more measuring the impacts and the outcomes rather than what you're putting in? Because I think this is where you can use it as a great way of, I guess, achieving the best possible outcomes, okay? So for K11, as many as you know, our CEO, Adrian Cheng of the Cheng family, he's extremely personally passionate about social impact, through driving community impact, youth at risk, mental health and well-being, and families, but also through directly investing in arts and culture, and making arts and culture that might normally be accessible to a very small percentage of society, but making that accessible to people that visit K11 malls and offices and getting people to appreciate the value of arts, what it does for connecting communities, what it does for cultural identity, and what it does for giving people, I guess, it connects through education and a sense of a belonging. So New World heavily invests in conservation, arts and culture within all the operations that we undertake, and it is a key theme of ours. And a lot of these arts aren't just New World investing, finding artists from international recognition from the other side of the world. A lot of these operations, particularly in K11, heavily invest in local artists and upcoming artists. And I think and investing in arts that are even at the startup stage and trying to connect some of those with some of our sustainability outcomes, whether that be artisanal products they're creating, whether that be umbrellas from recycled plastic in our shopping malls, whether that be other, retail tenants. Because as you might see, a lot of retail tenants are starting to, I guess, forward-thinking ones that are certainly also targeting younger generations. They're starting to really promote product stewardship. And what I mean by that is they'll say, oh, look, when you come into our store, if you bring your old phone case, we will give you a new one and here's the change in price and so forth. But they take that product and they take it back and reinvest. So it's a way of how you align the values that I was speaking about before with how you implement physical elements to your leasing and attract the right tenants, to then how you operate these particular assets. And cultural commerce is an example in Victoria Dockside, whether it be through artworks, the architecture and design, the guided tours. Our community events are often, most of the time, publicly available. They don't cost, they're in publicly available places. But it gives you an idea of the fact that we shouldn't overlook art and its role and culture in its role in the social aspect of sustainability, and how we can, I think, start measuring and placing more value in these in the non-financial aspects of an organisation rather than just revenue, profit, EBITDA. Okay? And I think, and obviously creating spaces for art here in Shanghai with artist workshops, art exhibitions, varying types, education courses for children in Shanghai Art Mall here. So it's something we continue to do as an organisation. I think it shouldn't be overlooked by any organisation how you're best placed to drive social impact from where you are. So look, finally, thank you for your time. I know I've covered 3 very diverse things, from climate resilience to sustainable leasing, right the way through to art and culture, but I think it's important, if you're in the design, if you're in finance, if you're in legal, if you're in marketing and sales, if you're in leasing, all of these things actually can play a material role, and in your roles you can play a material role in contributing to these, because these are all part of a continually growing and emerging market. And I think we all want to leave a positive legacy for society, and we also want businesses to continue to thrive. So thank you very much for your time.